respond. Danae Pressler. Robert Bondenacker. Robert Bondenacker. John Sherrill.
Here.
Thank you. Derek Castaneda.
Present.
Thank you. Ron Gritman. Hondo Judd. Chris Bridges. Byron Easton. Deb Ferraro. Rhonda Humboldt.
Present.
Thank you. Matt Potzler.
Present.
Thank you. Scott DeBias.
Present.
Thank you. Melissa Madison. Sam Brown.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan Fudge.
Present.
Thank you. John Woods.
Attending.
Thank you. Walter Bouchard.
Present.
Thank you. Amanda McGinnis. Junwan Ju.
Here.
Thank you. Michelle Wilson. Mike Denby. Steve Trussell. JC Porter.
Here.
Thank you. Dave Barry. Ed Stillings. Spencer Camp. Spencer Camps. Kim Butler.
Here.
Thank you. Liz Foster.
Here.
Thank you. Gina Leverett Mason. Kristen Watt.
Present.
Thank you. Michelle Kamikawa. Michael Chamberlain.
Present.
Thank you. Mackenzie McGuffey.
Present.
Thank you. Susie Stevens.
Present.
Thank you. One moment, please. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, a quorum is now present. The meeting of the MAG Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee is now called to order. Thank you for attending today's meeting. Copies of today's meeting agenda packet are available on the information table in the hallway. The presentation is posted on the MAG website under today's Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee meetings. The MAG public comment process provides opportunities for members of the public to comment on items scheduled on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. Opportunities are provided for public comment under call to the audience and action items. MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website prior to the meeting, as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time for the meeting. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table in the hallway. Please be sure to indicate the item for which you want to speak and give it to a designated MAG staff member. If you parked in the garage, remember to validate your ticket. Parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. For those who purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. And please note that hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. For agenda item number 2, call to the audience. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Members of the public who are attending in person may deliver their comments from the lectern at the front of the room. You have up to 3 minutes to complete your comments. A timer is provided to assist you. When the light on the timer changes from green to yellow, you have 1 minute remaining. If the light turns red, a buzzer will sound, meaning your allotted time has expired. Have we received any comment cards?
Madam Chair, we did not receive any written comment cards.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public here today who desire to speak? No? MAG also provides the opportunity for members of the public to submit written comments prior to the meeting as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time. Sorry, we already covered that. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 3. Approval of the May 26, 2022 meeting minutes. Is there any discussion on the meeting minutes? Hearing none online and seeing none here in the room. Prior to taking a vote on agenda item number 3, staff, do we have any speaker cards for this item or any written comments?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the May 26, 2022 meeting minutes?
I approve. Liz Foster, Maricopa County Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Liz. Can I get a second?
John Sherrill, City of Chandler, I'll second.
Thank you, John. We have a motion from Liz Foster and a second from John Sherrill. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room? We will do the people online in just a moment. So a voice vote of those in the room. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. Those who wish to abstain from vote say abstain. Okay, and now a roll call vote of all members participating virtually will be taken at this time by Lisa Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, when I call your name, please state your vote. Danae Pressler.
Aye.
Thank you. Robert Vondenacker.
Aye.
Thank you. John Sherrill.
Aye.
Thank you. Derek Castaneda.
Aye.
Thank you. Ron Gritman. Hondo Judd.
Aye.
Thank you. Chris Bridges.
Aye.
Thank you. Brian Easton. Rhonda Humbles.
Aye.
Thank you. Matt Potzler.
Aye.
Thank you. Scott DeBias.
Aye.
Thank you. Melissa Madison. Sam Brown.
Aye.
Thank you. Jonathan Fudge.
Aye.
Thank you. John Woods.
Aye.
Thank you. Walter Bouchard.
Aye.
Thank you. Amanda McGinnis. Mike Sonnenberg. June Wanju.
Aye.
Thank you. Michelle Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye. And can you also mark me present? I was having trouble with my computer audio earlier.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Michael Denby.
Thank you.
Steve Trussell. Jesse Porter.
Aye.
Thank you. Dave Barry. Spencer Camps. Kim Butler.
Aye.
Thank you. Gina Laverick Mason. Kristen Watt.
Aye.
Thank you. Michelle Kamikawa. Michael Chamberlain.
Aye.
Thank you. Mackenzie McGuffey.
Aye.
Thank you. Susie Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we have a unanimous vote.
Thank you, Lisa. Moving on to agenda item number 4, update on planning efforts for the development of a moderate area plan for Maricopa non-attainment area. The presentation will be provided by Matt Poppin of Maricopa Association of Governments.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Next slide, please. And go ahead and next slide, please, as well. Thank you. So back on April 13th, 2022, EPA proposed to reclassify the Maricopa non-attainment area from a marginal area to a moderate area. And this is because the non-attainment area did not meet the standard by the August 3rd, 2021 attainment date, and also did not qualify for a one-year extension of the attainment date. So with the reclassification proposal, the new attainment date will be August 3rd, 2024 for a moderate area. If EPA finalizes the proposal, a moderate area state implementation plan will be due to EPA by January 1st, 2023. That's their current deadline. Comments on the proposed rule were due back on June 13th, 2022. And EPA has actually yet to finalize this reclassification. We've heard informally from EPA that finalization would likely take place in September of this year. So we'll wait and see. But we do anticipate that they will move forward with that finalization. I just want to kind of highlight some of the key requirements, and this will be the majority of the presentation. We'll be going over where we're at in regards to these requirements. But in summary, again, the attainment date must be demonstrated at all monitors by August 3rd, 2024. Since that attainment date is in the middle of the summer ozone season, the plan is required to demonstrate attainment using ozone monitoring data from the 2021 through 2023 three-year period. The plan is also required to demonstrate a 15% reduction in VOC emissions over a 6-year period, beginning with the base year of 2017. So for the next 6 years following that, 2018 through 2023, there needs to be a 15% reduction in VOC emissions across the non-attainment area. Reasonably available control technology is also required. Reasonably available control measures. This is the measures required to show attainment within the area and also meet that 15% VOC reduction requirement. And then lastly, contingency measures are also required. And these have to be new measures that are ready to be triggered if the area fails to attain or make that 15% VOC reduction. Next slide, please. Before I kind of go through the update of where we are in regards to those planning requirements, I wanted to show the current monitoring data for the committee. This is the design value. So this is the way the standard is. It's a 3-year average of the 4th highest ozone concentration within the non-attainment area. So we're looking at a 3-year average period. So the most latest period we have data for is 2019 through 2021. The blue line represents monitoring data without the exclusion of wildfires, and the red line represents monitoring data when wildfire ozone exceedance days are excluded. So currently, 2019 through 2021, the design value is 80. If you don't exclude wildfires, if you exclude wildfires and their impacts on exceedance days, the design value is 75. We're not through the 2022 ozone season quite yet. Still have 2 more months or a month and a half. But it's looking like we will roughly be right around that 75 mark as well once wildfires are excluded. So we anticipate to be roughly around 75 for the 2020 through 2022 period. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little more context on the wildfire data, the graph on the left shows the acres burned, the 3-year average of acres burned by states. And these are the states that are bordering Arizona. So you have California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and Utah. The dotted line shows the total of all those 5 states, including Arizona. And you can see, starting in that 2016 period, we have had quite an average increase in the acres burned throughout the West. And then the graphic on the right is kind of comparing the acres burned along with the design value, the ozone design value that was just shown on the prior graph. While there are a lot of factors that influence ozone concentrations, we do think that wildfire data has significantly impacted ozone and increased concentration values. Next slide, please. Earlier, MAG met with ADEQ, Maricopa County Air Quality Department, and the Pinal County Air Quality Control District to determine specifically which dates are believed to be, which ozone exceedance dates are believed to be directly impacted by wildfires over the last 5 years. And so these are the dates that are agreed upon currently by the agencies. You can see there were 8 days in 2017 and up to 29 days in 2021. So there are a significant number of dates that are believed to be impacted by wildfires. I would also note that it is possible that other exceedance dates have also been impacted by wildfires, but at this point, there is not enough data available to directly make that link to satisfy EPA requirements. So these are the dates where, at least initially, there appears to be enough initial data to begin to consider excluding these dates from monitoring. Next slide, please. I thought it would be good, again, to kind of remind the committee of the complexity of ozone, because we're going to be seeing some kind of counterintuitive data as we go along through this plan. And I think this graphic helps to explain why some of that data is counterintuitive at times. As you may remember, ozone is it's not formed directly from emissions from industrial sources and natural sources, but it's formed through chemical reaction in the atmosphere between nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds in the presence of sunlight. So what this graphic is showing is you have your initial emissions from natural and man-made sources, but they go through quite a complex process before you actually get the ozone concentrations that we read at the monitor. So you have the emissions, and then you have the chemical reactions that occur in the atmosphere, and those chemical reactions are always occurring. They're going back and forth. They're not a steady state. The amount of sunlight obviously has a huge impact for ozone. The weather impacts, our monsoon season, wind, rain have a huge impact, and then topography, the mountains, the high buildings, all of those things impact the final concentrations of ozone that we ultimately see at the monitor. So an important thing to keep in mind is, because of this complexity, when you see a reduction in precursor emissions, you don't always get that same equivalent reduction in ozone concentrations, because there are so many factors that contribute to ozone formation. And I kind of want to go through a few of those with the committees as we move forward. Next slide, please. So again, this is just a really simple presentation of how ozone is formed, kind of in the natural state where there aren't any additional emissions. Ozone is constantly being created and constantly being destroyed. You have kind of two cycles that are next to each other. You have the ozone cycle, where an oxygen atom is being added to create ozone, and then it's being taken away to go back to oxygen. And then you have the nitrogen dioxide cycle, where sunlight comes in, provides the energy to break up nitrogen dioxide. That gives you that extra oxygen atom that can be formed to ozone. And these are constantly cycling back and forth. So in this kind of balanced state, no new ozone is produced. You just kind of have a background level of ozone. Next slide, please. However, when you introduce precursor emissions, and the main ones, there are actually several hundred compounds that contribute to the cycle, maybe even thousands, but the main ones are volatile organic compounds, nitrogen oxides, and carbon monoxide. So when you introduce those into the lower atmosphere, it changes that balanced state, and it allows for the increase in ozone. Particularly, you have this kind of new cycle, this new middle cycle of the hydroxide cycle. And these are very reactive elements. So it speeds up that nitrogen dioxide cycle, which allows for ozone to be created more quickly, and in some cases allows for ozone to be destroyed more quickly too. But in general, the increase in VOC and CO emissions and the increase in NOx emissions speeds up this process to where you have an imbalance and more ozone is created. Next slide, please. The other important factor to realize with ozone is the amount of VOCs and the amount of NOx in the atmosphere has a controlling effect on how much ozone is produced. So that rate of ozone production can either be limited or controlled by either VOCs or NOx. And so we call those things VOC limited or NOx limited. So when that hydroxide production cycle is greater than the nitrogen dioxide cycle, we are in a NOx limited environment. And so some of the characteristics of that are NOx emissions are in short supply. So there's a lot of VOCs relative to NOx. And in this case, ozone is most effectively reduced by lowering current and future NOx emissions rather than by lowering VOC emissions. In general, we find that downwind suburban monitors and rural monitors especially are generally NOx limited. And that makes sense if you think about it. There's not a lot of combustion sources. There's not a lot of cars in rural locations. So there's a lot more VOCs relative to NOx. And so those areas are NOx limited. Now, the other side of the cycle is when you have high hydroxide production relative to NOx production, that's a VOC limited area. In this case, NOx emissions are plentiful and you have a low VOC to NOx ratio. In this case, ozone is most effectively reduced by lowering current and future VOC emissions. And kind of ironically, counterintuitively, reductions in NOx emissions may actually lead to short-term increases in ozone in this situation. And the monitors that are most likely to be VOC limited are those located in urban and industrial areas where NOx emissions are plentiful. Again, this is a very complicated things, and NOx limited and VOC limited conditions can change on a daily, hourly, or weekly, even seasonal basis. So these aren't very steady state conditions. They can change a lot and depending on the emissions that are being emitted on a particular day, the particular meteorology, and also other factors. But it is really important to understand if you're VOC limited or NOx limited when you try and think about what controls will be most helpful to reduce ozone in our non-attainment area. Next slide. Again, this is just another example of how that NOx limited, VOC limited reality gets expressed in ozone concentrations at the monitors. So I picked 3 monitors here. We have the Humboldt Mountain monitor. This is still within our non-attainment area, but it's a very rural area, the very northernmost part of our non-attainment area in the Tonto Forest. That's the blue line. A suburban monitor is the Pinnacle Peak monitor. That's located in North Scottsdale. And then we have an urban monitor, West Phoenix, which is kind of 35th Avenue and Thomas, that kind of general area. That's a very urban monitor. And what these lines represent are hourly average ozone from the start of the day through the end of the day. So you can see the curve for Humboldt Mountain is very flat. So ozone is pretty much constant throughout the day up at Humboldt Mountain. And this is largely because there are no NOx emissions up there. So ozone is neither being created nor destroyed. It's being pretty constant. However, we still do have exceedances at Humboldt, and that's largely when you get transport of NOx or transport of just ozone in general to that monitor, either from the non-attainment area or from interstate or international transport. If you look at the Pinnacle Peak monitor, it's somewhat in between. The evening hours are still, and the early morning hours are still pretty flat because there isn't a lot of NOx available. Most people are asleep. Not many cars are being driven. Not many industry is happening. It's a suburban area. But you can see that when the wind takes urban emissions up to Pinnacle Peak in the afternoon, you start to get an increase in ozone. And then West Phoenix is very typical to a what we would call an urban monitor, where you kind of have a constant interaction between NOx and ozone. It's being created and destroyed. Ozone's being destroyed in the evening hours and the early morning hours, and then it's being created in the afternoon hours pretty rapidly. Next slide, please. One other thing that can help identify what monitors may be NOx limited and which monitors may be VOC limited. And again, this is just one tool. It's not the only tool. As you look at the difference between their 8-hour average and their 24-hour average. So the monitors in red are monitors where there's a big difference between that 8-hour average and the 24-hour average. So you know there's a lot of ozone chemistry occurring. Ozone is being formed and destroyed throughout the day, both evening and night. And you can see those are mainly our urban monitors, clustered near the freeways, clustered in the urban core of the non-attainment area. As you start to move out from that core, the difference between the 8-hour average and the 24-hour average decreases very small, and those monitors in the blue are likely to be NOx limited. So reductions in NOx emissions are likely to be beneficial for those monitors. Reduction in NOx emissions for the red and yellow monitors, it's not as clear. It's probably a mixture of both, or on some days, reductions in NOx might actually lead to increases in ozone. So those are much more complicated monitors. But that kind of gives you an idea of some of the complexity that goes along as we try and examine appropriate control measures for the area. Next slide, please. So I wanted to also display what has been going on with emissions in our area. So existing control measures have really drastically reduced Maricopa County man-made emissions when you look at emissions reported from 2011 to 2020. So the orange line are VOC man-made emissions, and the blue line is man-made NOx emissions. And you can see very drastic reductions in emissions over this 9-year period, starting in 2011 through 2020. And this is despite increases in population, increases in vehicle miles. So beginning in 2011 to 2020, we have almost a 50% reductions in NOx emissions from man-made sources. We have about a 29% reduction in man-made sources of VOC emissions. So this is where things start to get a little counterintuitive. If you're having these large reductions in emissions, how come you're not seeing that as much in the ozone concentrations themselves? Next slides, please. So those are emissions. So we want to look at what are the concentrations at the monitors. So unfortunately with VOC, we only have one monitor that records VOC emissions. That's the JLG Supersite monitor run by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. It's located approximately at Camelback and 17th Avenue. And VOCs are only measured once every 6 days in the summer, and it's a 24-hour average. So because the data is really limited and pretty sporadic, the VOC concentration trends don't really, it's not very useful data. So we can't really get any information from this data. One thing that will be interesting is beginning in 2021, hourly VOC concentrations are now being reported at the Supersite. So if we look at hourly concentrations over the next few years, that might give us some insight into what's really happening with the concentrations of VOC in the area. But right now, we just don't have very good monitoring data. And that's because VOCs are very difficult to monitor. They're very specialized, and it takes a lot of equipment to get accurate VOC measurements. Next slide. However, we do have good NO2 concentration data. So we can compare the NO2 concentration data to see how it matches up with our what we believe are the emission reduction data that I showed earlier. And so there are 5 monitors that record NO2 concentrations. NO2 is nitrogen dioxide, and it's only one portion of NOx. NOx is both nitrogen dioxide and nitric oxide together, but most monitors only record NO2. So you can see we are seeing reductions in NO2 across all the monitors, with the largest reductions being at more of the urban monitors. The green line I want to point out, that's the 33rd Avenue monitor. That's the monitor located right near I-10. So that's a near road monitor, literally just right off the shoulder of I-10. And that's designed to capture the highest vehicle traffic area within the non-attainment area, and where NOx emissions are theoretically the highest. Next slide. There is one monitor, the SuperSite monitor, that does capture NOx data, so both NO2 and NO. This is the SuperSite monitor. However, that stopped in 2017, but what we do see from 2011 to 2017 is we saw a 31% reduction in NOx concentrations, not emissions, but concentrations at the monitor. There is another chemical compound that the SuperSite monitor takes samples of. It's called NOY, and that's NOx concentrations plus some additional reactive compounds. And that one shows a 45% reduction between 2011 and 2021. So that lines up pretty well with the, I think, approximately 49% reduction in emissions in the emissions side. So our data is lining up pretty well. So those emission reductions we're seeing, we believe to be pretty accurate because they're being reflected in the monitor data. Next slide, please. One last slide for you on NO2, and this kind of shows you what's happening with ozone. So the slide on the left is the West Phoenix monitor. The dark line is the 2011 values, and the kind of dotted bar is the 2021 values, and this is on an hourly basis. The graphic to the right is the 33rd Avenue. This is the near road monitor. Again, the solid bar is 2016. That's when the first year it started. And then 2021 is the dotted bar is 2021. What's really interesting about these two graphics is these monitors are only 1.7 miles apart. So they're very close to each other, but they have very different things going on within the atmosphere. You can see the graph on the right. This is the near road monitor. You can see the drastic reduction in emissions being reflected in those concentrations. The 2021 concentrations are way lower than the 2016 concentrations. In this situation, we would be in a VOC limited environment. So there's so much NOx being created that ozone is having a hard time being produced locally right near this monitor because there is an abundance of NOx. However, just 1.7 miles away, you have the West Phoenix monitor. And you don't see that same sort of reduction between 2011 and 2021. And what's happening here is you have that ozone production occurring in those morning hours, in the afternoon hours between 7 a.m. and 18 at 6 p.m. Ozone is being created. Ozone is using that available NO2, and you're having ozone creation. You see kind of the blips when you would expect blips to occur with traffic around 6 a.m. and around 7 p.m. You expect NO2 concentrations to be higher, but you might be asking, why are NO2 concentrations still higher in the evening? Well, that's ozone giving NO2 back to the monitor. So that's ozone being destroyed, and you have an additional NO2 being created. So it's just very important when I put this up here to illustrate the complexity that's going on. Those don't necessarily represent just emissions. Those represent the chemistry that's occurring. So we have to take all these into account when we're looking at control measures that'll make the most sense for our region. Next slide, please. And lastly, here again, here's the relationship that you can see between ozone and NO2. This is at the West Phoenix monitor. And you can see they're kind of related to each other. As one is being created, the other is being destroyed. So you have this huge increase in ozone in the afternoon hours. It's using the available nitrogen dioxide to grab that extra oxygen atom and create ozone. So that's why NO2 concentrations get lower in the afternoon. And then in the evening, when the sunlight comes down, ozone starts to fade. It gives up some of that oxygen atoms, and the NO grabs it, and you have higher NO2 concentrations in the evening. So there's this complex chemical relationship that's always occurring. Next slide, please. Lastly, this is my last monitor data slide, and we'll get on the updates on the requirements. So what's happening with ozone? So given all of that, given that we've seen these large reductions in NO2 emissions, NO2 concentrations, what's happening with ozone? This is hourly average ozone at all the monitors. And the upshot is ozone is basically flat from 2011 through 2021. So despite significant reductions in NOx and VOC emissions, and despite significant reductions in NO2 concentrations over that same period, we're not seeing the same reductions in ozone. And we're still honestly trying to figure that out, trying to figure out what is occurring. Is it the natural background conditions that have increased? Biogenics are very, biogenic emissions can fluctuate a lot. So there's still a lot of complex things happening that's occurring. And the other point I want to point out is it's important to remember that compliance with the ozone standard is not really based on these hourly averages. It's based on that fourth highest value in each year. So it's really based on spikes or episodic exceedances. So there isn't necessarily a connection between hourly average ozone and the design value that ultimately you're comparing to the standard. But all of this was designed to kind of give the committee an idea of the complexity that we're dealing with when we try and control ozone. It's not as simple as just reducing emissions, and we see those equivalent reductions in ozone concentrations. Next slide, please. Okay, here's some updates on where we are with RACT. This is reasonably available control technology, and this is being handled largely by Maricopa County and also a little bit by Pinal County Air Quality Control District. RACT applies to the major sources of VOC and NOx, those sources that emit 100 tons per year or more. And it also applies to categories of sources which EPA has issued particular guidelines for. So Maricopa County is still in the process of developing what they call negative declarations for sources that do not exist in the area. And they're also reviewing existing major sources and existing CTG categories to see if permitting and rule changes are required. So Maricopa County is still reviewing RACT requirements. Pinal County has indicated to us that there are no new sources that are subject to RACT within the Pinal portion of the non-attainment area, and existing rules should meet RACT. So there shouldn't be any changes required in that portion of the non-attainment area that's in Pinal County. The existing rules should be equivalent to meet RACT requirements. Next slide, please. I wanted to share with you briefly the emissions inventories for the base year. This has been completed. This is the draft inventory. We have one for VOCs. The next slide will be NOx emissions, but for VOCs, we have a daily total of 430.39 tons for the season day average. Almost 60% of the emissions is from biogenic sources. A very small percentage is from point sources. Area is the next largest category, about 24%. On-road vehicles are 10%, and non-road vehicles are about 5%. Next slide, please. Here's the breakdown for nitrogen oxide emissions, 134 tons per day on average. Point sources are approximately 7%. Area sources are almost 9%. On-road sources are 45%, and non-road sources are nearly 35%. So we still have the bulk of NOx emissions from vehicles. Next slide, please. In terms of where we are with modeling attainment, so again, 2017 has been selected as the base year for modeling. After we remove the wildfires that we talked about earlier, the design value that we have to reduce is 75.3 parts per billion at the MESA monitor. So the MESA monitor has the highest concentration, and in 2017, that value is 75.3. We have to lower that value to 70.9 in 2023 in order to demonstrate attainment. So when we look at preliminary 2017 base year modeling, we can kind of apportion where that 75.3 is coming from on average. So on an average day at the MESA site, boundary conditions, which is like background ozone, international emissions, natural emissions, the stuff that's coming into our modeling domain, that's 45.7 parts per billion comes from these boundary conditions. When we particularly look at Mexico, man-made sources, we get 3.4 parts per billion coming from Mexico. Man-made US sources, so this is outside of Arizona, but within the United States, that contributes 5.1 parts per billion on average. Man-made Arizona sources, just within the state, but not inside, but outside the non-attainment area, contribute 3.3 parts per billion. And when we look at just the non-attainment area, we're looking at 12.4 parts per billion. So when you look at what is available to be reduced, our control measures largely only apply to non-attainment area. So we're only able to reduce a portion of that 12.4 parts per billion on average, which makes it difficult to show significant reductions in concentrations. Next slide. So what our preliminary 2023 modeling is indicating is that existing controls are not sufficient to demonstrate attainment in 2023. So in order to model attainment in 2023, new additional controls will be needed in order to meet the standard in 2023. And this is an important thing and very difficult thing to try and implement quickly, but any new control measure would have to be in place and implemented by June 1st of 2023 at the latest in order to be included in the 2023 attainment modeling. So any new control measure that may be adopted as part of the plan would have to be in place by June 1st in order for us to take credit for that in the attainment modeling. Next slide, please. So to help with attainment modeling, we have to do this reasonably available control measures requirements. And again, the overall requirement is that you have to adopt controls that will allow you to demonstrate attainment. That's the Rackham requirement. Additionally, this is a new requirement for the 2015 ozone standard. If your controls within the non-attainment area are not significant to demonstrate attainment, then you have to look at considering controls on intrastate sources. So these would be controls within Arizona, but outside the non-attainment area. Rackham is very broad, again, and applies to both stationary and mobile sources. Next slide, please. So in order to address Rackham requirements, attainment demonstration requirements, and contingency measure requirements, MAG has contracted with Ramboll US to develop a comprehensive list of new and available ozone precursor control measures. So what we're asking Ramboll to do is search the country and tell us what is out there, what is available that can reduce NOx and VOCs. The comprehensive list will include NOx and VOC emission reduction estimates and also cost estimates when data is available. So whichever measures Ramboll is able to identify, we will hopefully have NOx reductions and VOC reductions associated with those measures. Now, this list is kind of a first step in our planning process. It's meant to provide information necessary to develop what the committee may be familiar with as suggested list of measures for consideration and adoption by implementing entities. We don't expect that every measure on the comprehensive list would show up on a suggested list, but at this point, we want to see everything that's out there so that decision makers can come together, see what's feasible, and then recommend what should be on that suggested list. We're also asking that any member of the Air Quality Technical Advisory Committee with suggestions for new control measures can submit those to MAG as well. We will go ahead and include those in the comprehensive list and ask Ramboll US to evaluate those. Additionally, this comprehensive list will also be helpful in identifying contingency measures. So perhaps there might be a measure that doesn't get adopted as a control measure, but it could be adopted as a contingency measure. Also, we're also hopeful that this list may be applicable to intrastate sources, and that some of these measures may be appropriate for intrastate sources to consider adopting. So this is kind of a big, this is our first big effort to look at what's available. We know for sure we're going to need new measures in order to attain in 2023. So this is that step that we're taking. And I think at this point, I'll just open it up for questions, and that will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt, for that presentation. Do we have any questions? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. Thank you, Matt. To agenda item number 5. National Performance Management Measures Assessing Performance of the National Highway System Greenhouse Gas Emissions Measure. Tim Franquist with Maricopa Association of Governments will present.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll make this brief because it's a relatively a small topic, but just want to get it on everyone's radar if they haven't heard it already. In July 15th, the Federal Highway Administration did issue a proposed rule for it would be state departments of transportation and municipal planning organizations regarding CO2 performance measure targets. It is a proposed rule which comments are due on October 13th. Like any kind of target would be a declining target based on your region. Which we could potentially have some challenges there because we're just such a fast growing community. But nonetheless, the rule, it does have a comment period now, and we are planning on commenting on that, something pretty much kind of that effect, that declining targets in a growing community could pose some challenges. And then there's some technical issues there that we plan on commenting on. But in general, it's just I think what we've been seeing out of this administration is a real heavy lean into CO2. And this just will be part of our kind of normal performance measures that we do out of the transportation groups, but adding on CO2. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're working on.
Thank you, Tim. Do we have any questions on this agenda item? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. Agenda item number 6, dust mitigation plan review and update for PM10 reduction in non-attainment areas. This presentation will be provided by Kelly McKenzie of the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and Bruce Friedel, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and committee, for having us today. Next slide, please. Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Kelly McKenzie. I am with the ADEQ Air Quality Improvement Planning section. I am one of the unit managers. With me today is Bruce Friedel. He is one of our planning staff for Unit 1, and we're going to present today on the 2022 Dust Mitigation Plan Review and Update. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the US EPA exemption event rule provides for the exclusion of monitored air quality data when determining compliance with the National Air Quality Standards, or NAQS, if the state can show that an exceedance of the NAQS was caused by an exceptional event. There are a number of types of exceptional event that we can look at, such as wildfires, volcanic eruptions, or high wind episodes. Next slide, please. So under EPA's exceptional event rule, the state must demonstrate the following to exclude a relevant ambient data. So there must be a clear causal relationship between a specific event and a monitored exceedance or violation. The event was a natural event or caused by human activity unlikely to reoccur. And the event was not reasonably preventable or controllable. We have some examples here, such as a large dust storm or wildfires. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in October 2016, EPA revised the exceptional event rule by adding a regulatory requirement for states and tribes to follow as they develop mitigation plans for areas with historically documented or known seasonal reoccurring events. For example, 3 similar events of the same type and pollutant in a 3-year period. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so EPA identified 6 areas within Arizona that are subject to dust mitigation plan requirements. We have the Phoenix PM10 non-attainment area, the Rito PM10 non-attainment area, West Pinal PM10 non-attainment area, the Yuma PM10 non-attainment area, the Gila River Indian Community, and the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community. Next slide, please. Thank you. And as part of a dust mitigation plan, there are a number of components that are required to be included. This includes public notification and education, and these can include such programs that are already in place, such as the Air Quality Flag Program and the High Pollution Advisory Program. Next slide, please. It also includes the identification and implementation of mitigation measures, and these include things such as mandatory or voluntary measures for controllable sources, methods to minimize public exposure to high PM10 concentrations, processes to collect data pertinent to an event, and mechanisms to consult with other air quality managers to abate and minimize impacts. And as you can see, we have just a few rules that are already in place to control some sources. Next slide, please. Thank you. And also the other requirement is to do a periodic review of the mitigation plan's effectiveness and revision, which is what this plan is for. I'm now going to pass over to Bruce Fritter.
Okay, next slide, please. Oh, in 2018, the first mitigation plan was submitted to EPA, and it's listed there. And that submission included a commitment for periodic review of mitigation plan effectiveness and to revise the plan as needed. Next slide. So in 2022, ADEQ contracted ERG, or Eastern Research Group, to perform a review and evaluation of the Arizona Dust Mitigation Plan. Next slide, please. So as part of the review process, ERG sent out requests to all of the implementing agencies that have programs or measures in place, like notification programs, control measures, those types of things, to provide updates to the existing 2018 plan. And the stakeholders involved were ADEQ, ADOT, Maricopa County Air Quality Division, MEG, PDEQ, PEG, Pinal County, and Yuma. Next slide, please. As part of the evaluation process, included looking at implementation and effectiveness, for example, extent of program activities and coverage, frequency of notifications, ease of use, and customer satisfaction. And a couple examples there are the number of people that receive air quality forecasts and the change in the number of people receiving those forecasts and notifications since the 2018 plan, looking at any increases, and also the number of participants in the Air Quality Flag Program, which includes schools, community centers, and statewide. Next slide, please. So we should point out that, like the original mitigation plan, this review does not include any measures from the Gila River Indian Community or the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community. This plan does not create any additional requirements for PM10 controls for any of the listed areas. And we have modified the review cycle from every 3 years to every 5 years. Next slide, please. Currently, we have documents out for public review, which include the the review and evaluation report prepared by ERG, and also a revised mitigation plan that includes all of the updates provided by the stakeholders. Next slide, please. The public comment period started on July 28th and it runs through August 31st. And on that date, we will hold a public hearing to receive comments on the revisions to the plan and the report. And the link provided there will have all of the information about it'll have the actual documents that are up for review and information on how to join the public hearing. Next slide, please. So the next steps are, after the public hearing is held, we will prepare a response to comments received during the public comment period and hearing. And then we will submit the evaluation report and the revised plan to EPA for review, and at which time EPA will verify that the plan is complete and contains all of the required components. Next slide. Are there any questions or comments?
Do we have any questions or comments for ADEQ? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Kelly and Bruce. Moving on to agenda item number 7, proposed rulemaking to allow for the use of E15 gasoline within the cleaner burning gasoline area. This presentation will be made by Michelle Wilson of the Arizona Department of Agriculture, Weights and Measures.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't see my presentation. There it is. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Michelle Wilson. I'm the Regulatory Compliance Administrator for the Weights and Measures Services Division, and I appreciate this opportunity to present on our proposed rulemaking. Next slide. There are, for those of you who might not be familiar with who Weights and Measures Services Division is, we're in charge of protecting the integrity of Arizona's marketplace by ensuring that the equity and accuracy are preserved in weighing and measuring for commercial purposes. So we check the meters at the gas station to make sure you're getting a gallon of gas, and the scales at the grocery to make sure you're getting a pound of cheese, in addition to many other weighing and measuring devices that are out there. In addition to that, we are in charge of the enforcement of 2 air quality programs. One is cleaner burning gasoline, and one is gasoline station vapor recovery. Next slide. So our proposed rule had 4 main objectives. The first was a response to a proposal by industry stakeholders to allow the sale of E15 motor fuel within the cleaner burning gasoline covered area, and we refer to that as the CBG covered area. Next was to amend rules to complete a proposed course of action that was noted in a 5-year review report to provide clarity and consistency to our rules. And this 5-year review is done every 5 years. It was done in 2021, and there were just some clarity and consistency issues that needed to be addressed. And then, since we were doing the rulemaking, we decided we wanted to streamline the rules to reduce reporting requirements and other regulatory burdens without changing the air quality or consumer benefits associated with the cleaner burning gasoline program. And lastly, it's updating requirements to remove stage 2 vapor recovery provisions because that equipment had been decommissioned in 2018, so it's no longer at stations. and then updating test methods for stage 1 vapor recovery. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to focus mainly on the cleaner burning gasoline program and the E15 proposal, since that is what this advisory board is interested in. And the cleaner burning gasoline program was adopted in 1997 as a control measure to improve air quality. It provides benefits for carbon monoxide, ozone, and particulate matter. And during the summer, it has requirements similar to the federal reformulated gasoline program. So it's a special formulation that the federal government had adopted, EPA. And then during the winter, it has requirements similar to the California Air Resources Board Phase 2 gasoline requirements. And these were requirements that were adopted in the late 1990s and incorporated into our program. And it's incorporated into the state implementation plan approved by EPA. Next slide, please. So this map shows the cleaner burning gasoline covered area, and we refer to this as Area A, which is all of Maricopa County, plus a small portion of Yavapai County, plus a portion of Pinal County, where Apache Junction is. And so all of Maricopa plus this Area A is required to have cleaner burning gasoline year-round. Next slide. And then another portion called Area C is required to have cleaner burning gasoline from June 1 through September 30th of each year. And Area C picks up the remainder of Pinal County. And I'll note that tribal lands, motor vehicle proving grounds, and motor vehicle racing events are exempt from the cleaner burning gasoline requirements. Next slide. So E15 is a gasoline that contains more than 10% and no more than 15% by volume of ethanol. And right now, pretty much all of the gasoline for sale, with few exceptions, in all of Arizona has 10% ethanol. So this would allow, in our cleaner burning gasoline area, for it to go up to 15%. And E15 was approved by EPA in 2011, and it's approved for model year 2001 in newer light-duty vehicles and for all flex fuel vehicles. It's available in 30 states at over 2,400 stations, and it's currently allowed for sale in Arizona outside of the cleaner burning gasoline area. So anywhere outside of that Area A and the Area C in Maricopa County that I just talked about, it's already allowed. Our agency is not aware of it being sold anywhere at this time, though. Next slide. So in order to allow the use of E15 in our rules, we had to do some pretty extensive revisions to the rules because the way the rules work is refineries which are located outside of Arizona have to certify gasoline to show that it meets the air quality standards. And then once it's certified, they follow through with reporting and showing that that fuel is coming into the cleaner burning gasoline area and meets the standards. So we had to update the certification process and how oxygenated is allowed to be blended into the gasoline, and survey procedures to allow the addition of 15% ethanol. And I will note that this whole proposal just allows the sale of E15. It does not mandate the sale of E15 anywhere in our state. It just is changing the requirements to incorporate the allowance of being able to do that. It also has to incorporate requirements for facilities that perform oxygenate blending at motor fuel dispensing sites. And the way we did this is EPA in 2020 had changed their rules, and they allowed people to produce an E10, so 10% ethanol, and then blend in the additional 5% after the fact, and they included provisions. So we kind of followed the way they had changed their rules to kind of follow along that same kind of process to allow our rules to have people certify at 10% and then add an additional 5% up to 15% ethanol. And they might do that at a terminal, they might do that at a gas station. So we had to include requirements for all of those kinds of scenarios. We verified and updated as necessary requirements for dispenser and tank labeling, product transfer documentation, and dispenser compatibility, as well as updating compliance survey requirements to incorporate E15 sampling. And what that is there's an independent third party that comes and collects samples throughout the cleaner burning gasoline area, and they have them analyzed. So in addition to analyzing for the 10% ethanol samples, there's provisions for them, if there's E15 sold, for them to collect samples of that as well. Next slide. As far as the cleaner burning gasoline and motor fuel updates, we did do some fairly extensive changes to simplify the program. Our program was, especially for cleaner burning gasoline, it was developed in the late 1990s. And there's been a couple modifications, the last being in 2010, but there was a lot of outdated provisions, and it wasn't the easiest read, I'll put it that way. So we have tried to combine and reorganize it without changing any of the air quality standards within it. So we updated the testing specifications and test methods to more current test methods. We removed some Arizona-specific registration requirements for biofuels and removed outdated compliance options and reporting requirements. And as I mentioned already, we reorganized the rules for clarity and provided an exemption from those survey requirements that I just spoke of for suppliers that provide less than 1 million gallons of CBG per year. Next slide. So we began our rulemaking process at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, by internally drafting the rule and having discussions with ADEQ and EPA. I will note our agency, we're just an enforcement agency, and we enforce whatever fuels the legislature and EPA and ADEQ, it's okay air quality wise, and they're legal federally. We will enforce those rules. So we're, fuel neutral in any kind of fuel that we enforce. So we began those discussions because it's important that EPA and ADEQ are approving of any changes to those programs, since it is a state implementation plan program. On April 12th, we held a workshop regarding the proposed fuels updates. April 14th, we held another workshop regarding all of the other changes. And then on May 31st, we held a second workshop regarding the proposed fuel updates to review the changes that had been made based on the first workshop. And then on July 22nd, we proposed the notice of docket opening and notice of proposed rulemaking, and that was published in the Arizona Administrative Register. Next slide. So the next steps for the rulemaking are on August 30th at 10 a.m. There will be a public hearing, and then at 5 p.m. that day, the close of the rulemaking will be done and all the comments will be due. And then the next list of dates are potential dates. They're subject to change depending on what happens and how things go. But October 18th, the rule would be submitted to the Governor's Regulatory Review Council. They hold a 30-day period and then would hold a study session on November 29th and their council meeting on December 6th. December 8th, we would be able to publish the notice of final rulemaking. February 8th would be the effective date. And then following our rulemaking, ADEQ would submit the state implementation plan revision. Next slide. And that's it. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. And I've provided an email, dwm@azda.gov, if you have any questions, comments, etc., and my phone number. And there's a link to the proposed rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have any questions? Okay, hearing none, thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 8, requests for future agenda items. Do we have any requests by membership for an item on a future agenda?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Lisa Young, MAG staff speaking. I would like to submit a topic on behalf of Amanda McGinnis with Arizona Chapter Associated General Contractors, please. Amanda would like to submit a topic of drought mitigation and potential PM10 SIP compliance impacts.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Lisa, for reading that on behalf of Amanda. Do we have any other future agenda items? Okay, hearing none, we've reached the end of the agenda. Business is now concluded. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
This is Danae Pressler with Avondale. I'll motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, Danae. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.